March 1944, 11:32 in the morning, 20,000 feet above occupied Europe. A single American fighter pilot stares through his frost-rimmed canopy at a nightmare unfolding around him. 11 German aircraft have formed a noose in the sky, Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, their propellers catching the cold sunlight, tighten their circle with predatory patience. His squadron is gone, scattered across 40 miles of hostile airspace. No wingman guards his tail. No radio voice promises reinforcement. The mathematics of survival have collapsed into a simple, brutal equation. 1 against 11, and the 11 hold every advantage. Cannon fire rips past his cockpit. Tracers streak like burning needles. The German pilots are coordinating now, cutting off escape routes, boxing him into a killing ground of their own design. His hand finds the throttle. His eyes sweep the instrument panel one final time. And then he does the one thing no fighter pilot is ever supposed to do when outnumbered. And surrounded at altitude. He points the nose straight up and begins to climb. The radio frequencies crackle with German voices. Confusion first, then alarm, then something that sounds almost like fear. Because the American is not stopping. The American is not leveling off. The American is climbing into the thin, frozen edge of the sky itself, and one by one, the hunters become the hunted, their engines choking, their wings failing, their certainty dissolving into the vast indifferent blue. This is the story of a 7-ton fighter that defied physics, a pilot who trusted his machine when instinct screamed otherwise, and an escape so impossible that even the enemy could not believe what they were witnessing. The spring of 1940 transformed Western Europe into the most dangerous airspace on Earth. The Allied strategic bombing campaign had reached its terrible crescendo. Day after day, formations of heavy bombers B-17 flying fortresses and B-20 for liberators droned across the English Channel, their bellies heavy with explosives destined for German factories, rail yards, and oil refineries. The Luftwaffe threw everything it had against these aerial armadas. Fighter groups scrambled from airfields across occupied France, Belgium, and Germany itself. The sky became a killing ground, where survival was measured in seconds and luck was as important as skill. Into this maelstrom flew the escort fighters. Their mission was deceptively simple: keep the bombers alive long enough to reach their targets and return home. The reality was anything but simple. Escort pilots faced relentless attacks from above, below, and all sides. They burned fuel at catastrophic rates. They fought in temperatures that could freeze exposed skin in minutes. They made decisions in fractions of seconds that meant life or death for themselves, and for the bomber crews depending on them. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt arrived in this chaos, carrying a reputation as complicated as its engineering. Pilots who through it either loved the aircraft with fierce loyalty or cursed it with equal passion. There seemed to be no middle ground. The statistics alone made it an anomaly. Fully loaded for combat, the Thunderbolt weighed nearly 7 tons heavier than any single-engine fighter America had ever produced. Its fuselage was wide and blunt, built around a Pratt and Whitney R2800 double Wasp radial engine that could generate over 2,000 horsepower under optimal conditions. The cowling that housed this mechanical heart weighed more than the entire armament packages of some enemy aircraft. Pilots called it the Jug. Some claimed the nickname derived from its resemblance to a milk jug. Others insisted it was short for Juggernaut, The distinction mattered to those who flew it. One suggested clumsiness, the other suggested unstoppable power. Early combat reports painted a mixed portrait. The Thunderbolt could dive faster than almost anything in the sky. It could absorb punishment that would have shredded lighter fighters' bullets punching through wings and fuselage, while the aircraft kept flying, kept fighting, kept bringing its pilot home. Mechanics marveled at. The damaged Thunderbolts survived. Holes the size of dinner plates, control surfaces shot away, engines running with cylinders destroyed. But in a turning fight, especially at low altitude, the Jug struggled. Its massive weight became a liability. Energy bled away with every maneuver. Nimble Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs could turn inside the Thunderbolt's arc, positioning for killing shots while the American pilot fought to regain speed. Luftwaffe pilots learned this quickly. They developed tactics specifically designed to exploit the Thunderbolt's weaknesses. They would bait American pilots into climbing turns, watching the heavy fighters slow and wallow, then strike when their prey became vulnerable. American squadrons adapted a new doctrine emerged: avoid prolonged dogfights, maintain speed, use the dive as a weapon. Never let the enemy dictate the terms of engagement. Yet high above the continent, in the frozen reaches where bombers droned and interceptors climbed to meet them, the P-47 possessed a secret. Its designers had understood something that few pilots had yet discovered in combat. The Thunderbolt's turbo supercharger, an exhaust-driven compressor that forced air into the engine, at high altitude gave it capabilities that seemed to defy the laws of aeronautics. Above 25,000 feet, where other fighters gasped and struggled, the Thunderbolt breathed freely. Its engine maintained power. Its controls remained responsive. The playing field tilted in its favor. Most pilots never tested these limits. They flew the Jug the way they had flown other fighters, fast and low, trading energy in horizontal combat, respecting the conventional wisdom that said altitude was for bombers, not for fighters trying to survive a dogfight. The aircraft's true potential waited in the stratosphere, unrecognized and unexploited. A hidden card that the right pilot, in the right moment, might finally play. He arrived at Boxted Airfield in England as a replacement pilot, one of dozens cycling through the 8th Air Force's fighter groups as combat losses mounted. His personnel file contained nothing remarkable. No ace victories, no distinguished service medals, no family connections to aviation royalty. Before the war, he had grown up far from anything resembling an airfield. His world had been farms and small towns, places where machinery meant tractors and harvest equipment, where the sky was simply weather, not a battlefield. Aviation existed in newsreels and magazine photographs, exotic, unreachable, belonging to a different kind of life. When he enlisted, flight training nearly defeated him. He washed out on his first attempt. The rejection could have ended his aviation career before it began. Many men accepted such verdicts. Many walked away, found other ways to serve, made peace with earthbound futures. He refused. He reapplied. He studied harder. He practiced until the procedures that once confused him became instinct. The second time, he passed. His instructors noted his approach in evaluation reports. Not naturally gifted, they wrote. Not flashy, but disciplined, methodical, patient with the learning process in ways that flashier candidates often were not. He memorized limitations. He respected mechanical systems. He understood that aircraft were not conquered through aggression. but partnered with through understanding. These qualities served him well when he finally strapped into a P-47 Thunderbolt. The Jug was not a plane that rewarded ego. It demanded smoothness, anticipation, partnership. Pilots who tried to wrestle it into submission found themselves fighting the controls, burning energy, making mistakes. Pilots who learned its nature, who managed the turbo supercharger with precision, who adjusted trim carefully, who read the engine gauges like sacred texts, found an aircraft willing to do extraordinary things. He spent his first missions learning, not just learning to fly the Thunderbolt, but learning to survive over occupied Europe. He watched how experienced pilots managed fuel consumption. He studied the patterns of German interception. He noted which tactics worked and which got men killed during high-altitude bomber escorts. He began noticing something unusual when German fighters bounced them from above, forcing the Thunderbolts to climb. His aircraft did not behave the way he expected. If he managed the climb correctly, keeping speed high initially, nursing the turbo, resisting the urge to hold back on the stick, the Jug held altitude remarkably well. Better, perhaps, than it should have. He started experimenting. Not recklessly. Survival depended on caution, but methodically, the way his instructors had taught him. Small tests during non-critical moments. He converted speed into altitude, noting exactly how much he could gain before approaching a stall. He watched the manifold pressure gauge as he climbed past 28,000 feet, observing how the turbo supercharger compensated for thinning air. He pushed past 30,000 feet when fuel and circumstances allowed, feeling the aircraft's response in that rarefied atmosphere. The performance charts in the aircraft manual, he realized, were conservative. The P-47 could go higher than most pilots attempted, and at extreme altitude, it retained power that enemy fighters could not match. No one asked him to conduct these tests. No engineering officer requested data. He did it because curiosity and survival were the same thing. Because knowledge was the difference between dying surprised and living prepared. Because one day, the thing he discovered might save his life. The morning of the mission began like dozens before it. Briefing hut filled with pilots copying coordinates and headings. Intelligence officers describing expected opposition. The target was industrial facilities deep in central Germany. Opposition expected to be heavy. Altitude would be 24 to 26,000 feet. Weather clear over the continent. He pulled on his flight gear with practiced efficiency. Throat mic adjusted. Oxygen hose connected. Parachute straps tight, but not constricting. The rituals of preparation had become automatic, but he performed each step consciously. Automaticity could become carelessness. Carelessness could become death. The Thunderbolts waited in their revetments, massive shapes in the pre-dawn gray. Ground crews had worked through the night. Fuel tanks were full. Ammunition belts loaded. The big radial engines had been run up and checked. The aircraft were as ready as human effort could make them. He climbed into the cockpit, settling into the seat that had molded itself to his body over dozens of missions. The familiar sequence began. Fuel selectors positioned, trim tabs set, mixture rich, turbo controls verified, canopy locked. Engine start was always violent, the Pratt and Whitney coughing to life with mechanical fury, belching smoke, shaking the entire aircraft before settling into its characteristic rumbling roar. He ran through magneto checks, watching the tachometer, feeling the engine find its rhythm. Takeoff in a fully loaded Thunderbolt was never casual. 7 tons of aircraft and fuel thundering down a narrow runway, committed to flight. Hoping everything held together, the tail lifted. The rumble of wheels on tarmac smoothed into the pure sensation of flight. The gear retracted with a hydraulic thump, and England fell away beneath him. The formation assembled over the coast, then turned east toward occupied Europe. The Channel crossing was quiet, the climb to altitude routine. France appeared beneath them, then disappeared into haze. The bomber stream materialized to head dark shapes holding precise formation, their contrails scratching white lines across the pale sky. For an hour, nothing happened. The escort weaved above the bombers, scanning constantly, waiting for the attack that everyone knew would come. Fuel gauges crept downward. Tension built with each passing minute. Then the radio crackled with the words that ended the waiting. Bandits high, 9 o'clock. He spotted them immediately, small dark shapes descending from the sun's glare. Messerschmitts, at least a dozen, positioning for a diving attack on the bomber formation. The P-47 flight leader called the intercept. Throttles advanced. The Thunderbolts banked hard, climbing to meet the threat. What happened next dissolved into chaos. The German fighters split. Some continued toward the bombers. Others turned to engage the escorts. Individual combats erupted across miles of sky. Aircraft twisted and dove and climbed in a deadly three-dimensional dance. He engaged a Messerschmitt that crossed his nose, firing a burst that missed as the enemy pilot rolled away. He followed into a dive, closing the distance, firing again. This time the rounds connected. Smoke erupted from the German fighter's engine cowling. The aircraft rolled inverted and fell away, trailing fire. He pulled out of the dive, breathing hard, scanning for threats. His altimeter showed 18,000 feet. He had lost significant altitude in the engagement. The bombers were above him now, still under attack. He began climbing back toward the formation. The radio exploded with new warnings. More bandits approaching from the north. A second wave of interceptors, fresh and uncommitted, diving into the scattered American fighters. He looked up and felt his stomach tighten. A swarm of aircraft was converging on his position. Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, their approach vectors suggesting coordination rather than coincidence. He counted 5, then 7, then 11 distinct shapes, all oriented toward him. His squadron was gone, scattered across the sky in individual battles, too far away to help, probably fighting for their own survival. He was alone, and 11 enemy fighters had decided to make him their target. The first attacker opened fire from long range. Cannon rounds snapped past his canopy, close enough that he could see the tracers burning. He broke hard left, then reversed right, then pulled into a climbing turn. More fighters cut across his nose. Tracers filled the air around him. He kicked the rudder, skidding sideways to throw off their aim. He dove to build speed, but the enemy stayed with him. They were working together now, cutting off escape routes, boxing him into an ever smaller volume of sky. They had numbers and position. They only needed patience. His mind raced through options. He could not dive away, they would follow, and at lower altitude. Their lighter fighters would have the advantage. He could not turn and fight 11 against 1 was not a dogfight. It was an execution. He could not run horizontally there, would simply pursue until he ran out of fuel or made a fatal mistake. The conventional wisdom said he was dead. Every tactical manual, every doctrine briefing, every piece of advice from experienced pilots said there was no escape from this situation. But the conventional wisdom did not know what he knew about the P-47 Thunderbolt. He checked his gauges one final time. Manifold pressure normal, turbo functioning, oil temperature and pressure in the green. The engine was strong. The aircraft was undamaged. And above him, 20,000 feet of sky stretched toward the edge of space. He made his decision. The throttle went forward to the stop. Full combat power. The engine's roar deepened as fuel poured into its cylinders. He pulled the stick back not violently, but firmly and steadily, and the Thunderbolt's nose rose toward the vertical. The altimeter began to climb. 20,000 feet, 21,000. The airspeed bled away as he converted velocity into altitude, but he maintained just enough energy to keep the wings flying. Behind him, the German fighters followed. They expected him to level off any second. They anticipated a stall, a desperate roll, a mistake they could exploit. Their lighter aircraft climbed easily at first, matching his angle, closing the distance. 23,000 feet, 24,000. The first signs of trouble appeared among his pursuers. A Messerschmitt began to shake, its pilot fighting control surfaces that were losing effectiveness in the thinning air. The aircraft's mechanically driven supercharger could not compensate the way the Thunderbolt's turbo could. Power was dropping. Climb rate was falling. The German pilot had no choice. He pushed his nose down, breaking off the pursuit to regain speed before stalling. 20,000 feet. 27,000. More fighters fell away. Their engines were starving for air. Their wings could not generate enough lift. The physics of high-altitude flight were stripping away their advantages one by one. The Thunderbolt kept climbing. Its turbo supercharger screamed with effort, but held steady, forcing compressed air into the engine, maintaining power that seemed impossible at this altitude. The controls were mushy now, requiring constant small adjustments. But they still responded. The aircraft was still flying, still climbing. 20,000 feet, 30,000. He glanced back through the frost-covered canopy. The enemy fighters were scattered below him, dark shapes circling in frustration, unable to follow. Some were already turning away, heading back toward the lower altitudes where their aircraft could function. The German radio frequencies erupted. With disbelief, Allied intelligence would later translate the intercepted communications. He is still climbing. We cannot match altitude. We are breaking off pursuit. 32,000 feet. 33,000. The cold was beyond anything he had experienced. His cockpit heater was overwhelmed. Frost covered every interior surface. His breath came in deliberate, conscious pulls through the oxygen mask. Each inhalation felt like work. He watched his engine gauges with absolute focus. Cylinder head temperature rising but still within limits. Oil pressure steady. Manifold pressure holding at 48 inches, despite the impossibly thin atmosphere. The turbo was at its operational edge, but it was holding. 30,000 feet. He leveled off. The Thunderbolt floated in air so thin that the horizon seemed to curve at its edges. The sky above had deepened from blue to violet, hinting at the darkness of space beyond. Below, the war continued, bombers crawling toward their targets, fighters swirling in distant combat, flak bursts rising like slow-motion flowers. But up here, in the frozen silence, he was alone, untouchable, alive. He allowed himself one moment to absorb what had happened, one breath to acknowledge that he had done something no pilot was supposed to be able to do. He had climbed away from 11 enemy fighters and left them helpless below. Then the moment passed, and training took over. He began a gradual descent, nursing his fuel, angling back toward the bomber stream. The Thunderbolt picked up speed as it fell through denser air. The controls firmed up. The cockpit warmed slightly. By the time he reached 24,000 feet, the aircraft felt normal again, solid, responsive, ready. He rejoined the escort without fanfare. The other pilots were too engaged in their own survival to notice his return. No one had witnessed the climb. No gun camera had captured the impossible escape. Only the German pilots who had failed to catch him knew what had happened in those frozen minutes. Above 30,000 feet, after the mission, he filed a standard report. The intelligence officer raised an eyebrow at the altitude figures but did not challenge them. Thunderbolts were known to perform well at height. Word spread gradually through the squadron. Other pilots heard the story, tested the limits themselves, discovered that the Jug could indeed climb beyond what anyone had assumed possible. The tactical implications rippled outward through the fighter groups. High-altitude patrol positions became standard. The vertical dimension transformed from a liability into an asset. The Luftwaffe adapted, learning to avoid chasing Thunderbolts into the thin air, where American turbo superchargers dominated. But the balance had shifted. The P-47, once dismissed as too heavy and too slow for true fighter work, had revealed a capability that changed the mathematics of aerial combat. He survived the war. He came home. His name never appeared on ace rankings or in newspaper headlines. The escape from 11 fighters became a footnote, a story told over drinks, a lesson passed from pilot to pilot. But the lesson endured. Trust the machine. Understand its true capabilities. And when every option has been exhausted, when the conventional wisdom says there is no escape, look up. Sometimes the way out is straight through the sky itself.